eso que boda, homoni a la wana mama Kenya irawo, Barasuayo, homoni a la wana mama Kenya irawo,
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Crime Scenes and Cultures, where we seek to demystify the mysterious. This week, I want to welcome my co-host, archaeologist Steven Katz. Steven, how are you this evening?
Fine, Tony. Just a little bit cold here in Chicago.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're fighting the white stuff down here in the South as well, and hopefully we'll all come out in the warmth as the seasons come to change.
Oh, there you go.
So you've been on the road lately? Have you been traveling much for work, or?
We kind of slowed down a lot for winter, but I get a couple projects during the week, and mostly it's a lot of pictures and just documenting things and packing stuff up and get ready to go to the museum, the repository.
Excellent. Well, this week we want to share in a little different format about the religion of Santería. I have recently completed a book I've been working on for about the last 3 years on the religion of Santería called Fieldwork with the Saints, an ethnographic journey into Santería in the American South. And that's published by Anthrofolk Research Associates out of Memphis. And so this week I'm kind of going to hand the mic over to Steven, and we're going to share a little bit about the religion, about the book, and what we can glean from this journey. So, Steven, it's all you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tony. I think I just started off with the main question is, what is the origin of Santería?
Santería, as we see it in Hollywood, tends to focus on images of animal sacrifice, images of dark rituals and witchery. And the reality is that Santería is an African traditional religion. Santería, the name means way of the saints. And the religion's origins find themselves with one of the largest ethnic groups out of Nigeria, and that is the Yoruba. And the Yoruba have always had this rich cultural tradition of spirituality and healing. And this tradition focuses on the worship of specific deities known as orishas. And in the mythology of the Yoruba religion, it is taught that there is a creator deity known as Oludumare. And under this deity, there are several different gods. Some explain it as emanations of the creator, known as the orishas. The religion of Santería formed out of this religion. Originally, you'll hear the religion as being referred to from the Yoruba as this focus on the orishas, but later on what happened is this religion that had deep rituals, deep customs, specific dances, specific foods, specific ritual specialists. The religion was brought in the hearts and minds of those Yoruba families that were kidnapped during slavery and brought to areas like Cuba. And once in Cuba, the religion changed because it was forced to go into sort of a different way of being under the harsh conditions of slavery.
Well, that was a great introduction. That just really put everything into perspective. But I'm thinking about with the way you've answered and everything, I also understand that Santería is a mix of different religious practices. Is that true?
That's this changing of the Yoruba religion once it arrived in areas like Cuba. The religion was forced, in many occasions, underground because the those promoting slavery, the slave owners, the slave drivers, wanted many of the Africans that they had kidnapped and brought there to take on the religion of the slave owners. And so that religion in many cases was a form of Spanish Catholicism. So the practices that had been practiced for hundreds, if not thousands of years by the Yoruba were being looked at as being pagan, as being wicked, or some sort of primitivism. Slave owners forbid the practices of the Yoruba religion. And in fact, there were some very harsh incidents of abuse toward Yoruba who did not give up their practices. And so this transformation took place in which many of the Yoruba facets of spirituality had to go underground and become camouflaged. And so while they could not outwardly worship a deity such as the deity Chango, who's a very important Orisha in the pantheon of Santería, that they couldn't follow Chango publicly, but they looked and they saw that there were Catholic saints that the slave owners were promoting, such as Saint Barbara. And there were elements of Saint Barbara that were very akin to the personality and the attributes of Chango. Now, Chango was actually a African king in the province of Oyo in Nigeria. And after his death, he was deified and considered a very powerful spirit. And that's one thing we'll notice with Santería is not only are the deities viewed as powerful deities, but they were also at one time human beings that lived on earth. And so they sort of transcended into the spiritual realm. And the thing about this is practitioners share, because of this, the Orishas can relate to humanity. You know, if you're having problems with love, the Orishas have been there. If you're having an issue where a family member was done wrong, that anger, that hurt, that need to seek justice is there. And the Orishas understand that as well. And so in this process, we saw the Orishas take on sort of new costumes, if you will. One practitioner communicated to me that it was almost like the Orishas were wearing masks in the New World, that the people in the New World understood. And so you saw this combination been described. Some researchers in the past have described this as a form of syncretism. There are elements of syncretism, but the process is really way deeper. There's a complexity of why certain attributes of the saints and certain attributes of the Orishas were blended together in this sense of acculturation where these two cultures met. So over time, we would see practitioners of Yoruba religion now refer to other members as members of a faith called Lukumi. And Lukumi is said to be a Yoruba term describing my friend or someone that I resonate with. And so if your family followed the traditions of Yoruba religion back home, and my family did as well, you would be my friend. You would be part of that, the Lukumi. And so eventually we would hear the term Santería used because we would see altars and sacred spaces where there were not only images of African icons, but also images of European Catholic saints. And so that's why even today, going into someone's home that practices the religion, you may see sacred spaces with Catholic faces and African faces. This is where those two came together. And so over time, the religion went through numerous changes. And now, once it came to the United States, it also went through some changes as well.
Okay. Well, bearing that in mind, from a context of present day, where and how would Santería be practiced?
Well, you know, it's interesting. And one of the reasons that I wrote this book was because the religion for several years remained very, very much in the closet. Practitioners needed to be, because there were great misunderstandings about the faith. There's such a complex system of spirituality there that it's not something that just everyone should know about. There's specific rituals, there's specific initiations that want to be kept secret, not because there's anything nefarious, but because there is in the Santeria worldview, very powerful things going on in those initiations and in those rituals. And likewise, with all religions, you run the risk of someone taking something that is considered beautiful and powerful to a people and someone bastardizing it and utilizing it for their own selfish means. So there was that secrecy. And as the religion came to the U.S., we started seeing the religion manifest in different areas. Now, we know areas between Chicago and New York and Miami where you can go and there are great numbers of devotees to this spiritual tradition. But in areas like the southern U.S., particularly the Mid-South, the religion is practiced in many cases in secret. A lot of this has to do with the atmosphere surrounding the religion in areas like the area of the South I'm in that is colloquially known as the Bible Belt. In many cases, religions that aren't necessarily a form of Judeo-Christianity are perceived by different communities as being anti-Christian, some form of Satanism or witchcraft. And in a lot of cases, you've got devotees to these traditions that are chastised and in some cases bound to where they can practice and how they can practice because of the local cultural environment. And so when I started writing this book, one of the things that inspired me was that, for years studying the religion and getting calls about the religion throughout the years, I would get a call from an agency where, let's say, a police officer found a bag of chickens by a cemetery, or police officers were called to a home to answer a call. And when they were there, they noticed there was jewelry and altars and shrines that appeared very unconventional in their perceptions. And so there was this sort of this atmosphere of Santeria as this dark religion, that it's, primarily something that's practiced in secret because there's violence and there's animal cruelty associated with it and things like that. Over the years, as I came to know practitioners of the tradition, I started seeing some very different things. The religion was not just this dark, malevolent practice, but it was actually this beautiful spiritual tradition that really gave empowerment to communities. It preserved identity. And it has its own system of healthcare, whether that be from a spiritual approach or a medicinal approach, where specific herbal remedies are used to treat ailments. And so at one point during this time, I had met a Santeria priestess known as a Santera, and she had shared with me about moving to the southern U.S. from Cuba. And as we were talking, she said something to me one day about, I'm trying to practice my faith, but I live in an apartment and I have to be wary of people next door who might hear something or say something and immediately think the worst. And I thought about that and I thought, how many people have to deal with practicing their faith, exercising their constitutional right to worship, and have to worry about someone barging in on them, calling the police, there being all sorts of bad suggestions in the community about them. And so this led me to begin researching sort of the beginnings of where we saw this bad imagery of Santeria and where it came from. And so this was followed by a couple of years of ethnographic fieldwork in this work. Now, the beauty of this was my cultural consultants to the religion belonged to the house of the Santera that I had met. And so over time, there were relationships formed and, members of this particular house known as a ile would invite me to ceremonies and we would do interviews together. And it was interesting to see some of the perspectives that they had to hold in order to practice their religion. They would tell me stories about having to go to a particular place to, for example, there was a ritual done for Oshun, and Oshun is the Orisha identified with the river waters. And so her particular ceremony needed to be done at a body of water. Well, members of the temple got together and they went to a sort of non-disclosed area near a park. And as they were there, they were doing the ceremony that was very innocuous. They were placing a candle and some flowers and some different materials near this body of water for Oshun. And some people drove up on the scene, saw them out there, started hurling accusations. What are you doing out here? I see you're dressed in this white head covering, are you doing some kind of cultic work? What is going on here? And so you'd have incidents like that. You'd have incidents where a specific ceremony would require them to place the remains of animals that were used in a ceremony in a specific location, maybe a wooded area, maybe a cemetery. And they had to be very discreet about doing this. And so as I looked and started finding, where did we get this imagery of Santería as this bad religion? Some of the earliest findings historically, we could see even in Cuba, where newspapers would run stories about, look at the Africans that are living here and they're doing these crazy voodoo ceremonies. And there's even a horrendous article that was in one of the local papers in a community in Cuba that talked about the Haitians that would allegedly crucify infants. And so there were all these horrendous allegations against Africans and African religion. And this came to the U.S. after the Mario boat lift in the 80s. It was considered, particularly Miami, where there were incidents involving criminals that may have been with the Mario boat lift, that all of a sudden the non-criminal majority of folks that had anything to do with that were being portrayed as, evil thieves who use voodoo. And you would start seeing it in the papers in Florida. They would talk about these new shops called botanicas that are practicing this secret religion that they won't tell you about. And then you would hear of homicides where they would find a shrine. And of course, the allegation was immediately, oh, this was some sort of Santería ritual, because that's what this community does. And so over time, this combined with Hollywood depictions of the religion really sort of tainted how much of the West viewed the religion.
Okay, it seems just like in the media, it just portrays Santería as being more problematic.
Yeah, some of the earliest depictions of the religion was on the TV show Miami Vice. And of course, Miami Vice sought to capture the local folk life of what was going on in Miami during this time. And so, true enough, there were incidents where drug traffickers happened to practice the religion. And you would see episodes. I think there was one of the first episodes was called Milk Run. And during this episode, there were drug traffickers who were taking statues of the Yoruba deity Chango and stuffing them full of narcotics. And they were shipping these statues and trying to traffic these drugs. We would see more and more depictions. The movie The Believers with Martin Sheen was a big one. And this was taken from a book called The Religion. And the movie sort of took a buffet of spirituality from different African traditions and rolled them into one depiction of the Santería belief system and tradition. And so through the years, we would continue to see these different depictions. Eventually, Miami Vice went on to show a positive depiction of the religion with a santera who was sort of seen as a good heroine in the show. And eventually, over time, we started seeing more positive depictions, but still, even as recently as today, someone turned me on to a TV series that's showing elements of African traditional religion that is sort of taking its liberties with the aesthetics of the religion. And so, yeah, the media certainly has played a very big part in our understanding of this religion.
Okay, that's great. That's wonderful information. Can you just briefly go over how Santeria would differs from, say, hoodoo, palo, and other Afro-Caribbean practices?
Yeah, I always like for folks to picture African traditional religions as a tree. And from this tree, there are several different branches that branch off this tree. In Cuba, when I was in Cuba, it was a tremendous, tremendous experience because the area in Cuba where I was located was a virtual cornucopia of African religions. You had Santeria from the Yoruba, you had Palo and the Congo traditions from the Congo, from the Bantu people of Africa. You had the Abakwa society based from the Cross River region of Nigeria. You had members of the Rara, members of the Vodou communities with Haitian elements. There were all these different elements, and you'll see in African religions these commonalities. For example, in Santeria, you may have a deity such as Elegua, and Elegua opens the doorway. In Vodou, we have a figure known as Legba, and Legba is the master of the crossroads. He's standing at those crossroads. And so you'll see these common elements to deity, common elements found in ritual, but they are diverse and distinctive. So when someone says, oh, Santeria, that's voodoo. No, voodoo is a very different practice, coming from the same tree, but yet a different branch than Yoruba tradition altogether. And so that's one of the things that we had seen in media a lot, is depictions of these religions sort of thrown in a barrel and pulled out and said, oh, this is all the same. Voodoo is Santeria, is Palo, is Macumba from Brazil, Quimbanda, all these traditions. No, they're very separate, distinctive traditions with their own separate, distinctive histories and cultural elements within the religions.
Again, that's very interesting. And for somebody who's never really experienced anything like that, it's very eye-opening. Now, what are some of the main rituals, Tony, with Santeria?
So in Santeria, the teachings of the religion tell us that before we are born, we are identified with a specific Orisha. We are a child of a specific Orisha. And so the focus in life is to find out which Orisha rules your head. Your head, known as Ori, is an important place. It's where the soul resides. And so your main goal is to find out which Orisha you're aligned with, how that Orisha can be brought into your life in a fuller way, and how you can best serve that particular Orisha. And it's fascinating from an anthropological view how the personalities and temperaments of devotees to the religion match the personality and temperament of the Orishas. For example, someone will tell you, oh, he's a son of Jango. He may be quick-tempered. He could get angry really easy. He may be like a very powerful warrior. Someone may say, oh, she's related to Oya, the Orisha, identified with storms and cemeteries. And so she may be someone you don't want to mess with. She's a daughter of Oya. This particular ritual to receive the Orisha is a very involved process. And once it is determined through the clergy and through various systems of divination as to who your guardian Orisha is, you are set on a path to receive that Orisha to have that orisha placed inside your head. And this is it's a very tedious process. Part of it includes a number of taboos and restrictions on the devotee, where their head may be shaved or asked to wear white, and head is covered in white. And there are several taboos included in this. For example, during your time as a iyawo, which the word iyawo refers to being a bride of the orisha. Even if you're male, you're considered a bride to the orisha. During this time, you'll be told things like you can't look into a mirror. I found it really fascinating that two of my cultural consultants in the fieldwork, who were iyawos, I had gone to their house one day and had stepped into the restroom and noticed that the mirror above the sink in the restroom was covered with a piece of paper, really thick, like poster board, actually. And I asked them about that, and they said, as part of our taboos, we are not to look into a mirror. We're not to look at something that's going to bring about vanity. It's really fascinating because I would watch the taboos associated with this initiatory stage, and practitioners were following these restrictions even when no one else was watching. No one had any way of knowing that they weren't looking into the mirror when they weren't visiting with clergy, but they did. And they felt it was important to continue those taboos in regards to how they ate, how they slept, what they watched or what they took in to their minds and their bodies. So at the end of this process, which it takes a year, and at the end of this process, they are crowned in a ceremony with this orisha. And while that particular stage, the crowning, is something that is closed to outsiders of the religion, and I was not able to see that. I did get testimony from practitioners as to sort of what goes on during that ceremony, and was able to, in Cuba, actually see a son of Elegua and a son of Shango being crowned or coming out to the community as a child of that orisha. At that stage of initiation, this is called, they are now Omo Orisha, or a child of the orisha. And so when they're presented to the community, they come out in this beautiful dress or beautiful suit in the colors of the particular orisha that rules over them. For example, Chango has red and white, while Elegua will have black and red, or Yemeya will have blue and white. And so you see this amazing pageantry of when practitioners come out as going through that initiation. And there are several other rituals that take place yearly, such as a initiate's spiritual birthday. If you were initiated on June the 5th last year, then June the 5th will be a spiritual birthday observance for you. There may be feast days that are observed. For example, December 4th is St. Barbara's feast in the Catholic Church. December 4th to Santería practitioners is reflected as Chango's feast day as well. There are rituals concerning cleansings. In fact, I attended and documented a ceremony involving a young man whose family had become victims of a curse. And it was said that brujeria had been placed on the family. And when we talk about brujeria or witchcraft in this context, we're not talking about European witchcraft. We're not talking about Wicca. We're talking about a form of sorcery. And this particular ritual had to focus on cleansing this family of this, breaking them spiritually from this curse, and giving them protection from this particular curse. And what started out was going to be maybe a couple of hours ritual ended up being over 8 hours, a very intensive ritual where there were a lot of situations in that ritual that really gave me some firsthand observation to supernatural happenings. I know in anthropology, we have famous anthropologists like Victor Turner and his wife, who spoke on experiencing things during rituals in Africa that were not necessarily something that could be scientifically proven, but was definitely observed by them as it comes to supernatural things happening during ceremonies. And one of the things with ceremonies in the religion is that when we look at what kind of needs are met by these rituals in the Santeria community, there's feelings of protection, there's feelings of identity. You will find many botanicas, many of the spiritual supply stores, acting as doctor's offices, where you might go to a priest or priestess and they be able to spiritually divine what's going on with you. Or they may be able to prescribe a specific herbal remedy that will help you. In fact, I spent a lot of time with two initiates who had met their priestess, their madrina, as she was referred to, during COVID, because she was able to provide them with some specific remedies that aided their symptoms in dealing with COVID. And so it's very fascinating to see the customs and rituals and ceremonies and the beneficial aspects they have to members of the community.
Okay, my wife just came up to me and she asked me specifically, are there any marriage rituals involved in Santeria?
I have not witnessed any, but I'm sure there are some perhaps spiritual blessings that may be done by clergy. And again, because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just did not observe myself while in the field.
Now, I'm going to transition to talking about the book a little bit. I read it a few months ago and I reread it and everything. Can you just what drew you into studying Santeria and actually writing the book?
In the beginning, as I was sharing, over the years, we would get calls, particularly when I would be doing training for public safety agencies, where someone may discover a ceremony, or some officers get called to a scene where there's drumming and there's singing and they want to know what's going on. And in a lot of cases, one of the things that we would see would be a escalation of reactions toward activities. For example, I'll never forget, I got a call from an officer who had a report of a local citizen who was jogging in a suburb, and while jogging through the suburb, discovered a bag that had a dead chicken in it, with several pennies and cigars. The officer was saying, our fear is that if they're killing animals, they're going to be killing people next. And unfortunately, that seems like the immediate escalation that we would see in a lot of these cases, because the fear is that, yes, there is scientific evidence that, in cases of people who incur violence, that in many cases animal cruelty is seen in the life, whether it be at the young part of the life or sometime in life, from the perpetrators. However, animal sacrifice, while being a very hot topic of concern to those within and outside of the community, you have to understand that, one, animal sacrifice is not what Hollywood has depicted it to be in many cases. In the religion, animals are chosen that are specific animals. So you're not going to have someone just, pull up to someone's house and steal their dog out of their yard and go and kill it or anything like that. You'll see chickens, you'll see goats, the majority of animals are cooked and eaten. And when the sacrifice is performed, it's done by severing the carotid artery of the animal and placing it in shock so that it doesn't feel the pain. The animal is actually offered in what I would compare to a conversation with the gods, where They ask the gods, do you accept this? Is this what you want? Are you satisfied with this? And it's fascinating to watch that this particular conversation is very thick. It has a lot of aspects to it that go against Hollywood depictions of someone just savagely torturing animals and things like that. Now, again, most of our audience may look at this and go, wow, I don't agree with any of that. I don't think any of that's okay. And that is okay. That's, everybody has a right to their particular view on this. However, just so it be said, understand that the majority of animals are cooked and eaten. So the same chicken that may be killed out of the back of grandma's backyard and cooked for lunch, the same principle occurs. The animal that may be offered to a particular orisha may be placed in a stew for everyone at the end of the day. We see this occur, and of course, there's always the concern that this is going to escalate to violence toward people. And that's not the case. You have to understand, in a cultural context, the use of animal sacrifice, whether it be in Santería, whether it be kosher butchering, whether it be halal butchering, is done with a spiritual intent, not just to take the life of an animal. This sort of leads us into, what am I going to find when I go into a specific scene involving practitioners? Well, this is where it's very important for us to gain an understanding of what is considered sacred and what is considered taboo. Walking in someone's home that's a practitioner of this particular religion, and we see things like statues of the saints, piles of pennies, maybe cigars, maybe specific foods placed in front of in a particular sacred space. We may see ceramic dishes, these soperas. This is where sacred stones affiliated with the orishas are kept. And all these places are considered sacred spaces. They're places where the practitioner interacts with the divine. We have to be very careful when we interact in these spaces and get permission to touch specific things. And there may be things that, we may have to get someone to touch that is part of that particular house, that particular community, if it's necessary to touch those particular items. And so just being aware of what's sacred and what is considered taboo, because looking into certain objects like the ceramic tureens by someone who is not in the community, or really in a lot of cases who is not in that particular practitioner's house, is considered taboo. And so we definitely want to be mindful of what we do and how we interact with those specific materials.
What would you think would be the best advice for understanding Santería?
Well, I think with most of the cultures that we encounter, your best expert is a practitioner. Now, that being said, you will find that you most likely will not be able to just go knock on a practitioner's door and say, tell me everything about your religion. Because of that history of oppression, of chastisement, the religion is still kept secret, and even new initiates in the religion may not be aware of specific practices that are only revealed later in the religion at specific stages of initiation. Again, engaging members of the community. There are some really good academic works on the religion. I will, not to shamelessly plug, but I will say I wrote Fieldwork with the Saints from the perspective of an outsider. And that's who the book is for. It's for outsiders of the religion. And I do my best to explain sort of not only what you're going to see from the outside, but what you're going to also see on the inside as far as observing ceremonies, and insights of practitioners. Some of the things that, when we look at elements, and this is something that I think is really important, particularly in the area of public safety, it can be real tempting to look at an artifact and have a knee-jerk response as to the function of an artifact. We see this when we see if there's a training class on a particular culture. Oh, well, this color always means this, or this particular object always means this. Well, the thing that we have to understand is, like with Santería, the religion is alive. This is not just an old history book that's already been written and closed. And so you're going to find different worldviews associated with artifacts. And what may mean something to someone may mean something a little different to someone else in another community. We do see consistency in the use of artifacts and the use of ceremonies and rituals. And this is one of the things that protects the religion, is that the religion is orally transmitted. While you can read a lot of good books, a lot of good websites, you can watch a lot of good documentaries, but the reality is you can't learn to practice the religion merely by picking up a book. You can't understand all of the facets of the religion and how it's perceived and how it's practiced until you are in the field, and even then you're still limited by your personal observations and what you're given during that time. So I would definitely recommend those elements of talk with a practitioner, find some good academic books on the religion. And some of the best works on the religion are the ones that were written out of Cuba by anthropologist Lydia Cabrera. There's a beautiful book called El Monte. And El Monte is a book that was penned by Lydia Cabrera several years ago, and it was written in Spanish. And there was only until recently no English translations available. And it's a very thick book. I started translating years ago and was slowly but surely trying to do it, but it's a monster feat. So finally you can actually buy the book now, and it's in English, and it's some wonderful insight into the history and culture of the religion.
My final question is, like, I know what I do when I'm at the synagogue and every time thing, you always have these aha moments. Now, when you were in your doing your field work, was there anything that was an aha moment for you or really surprised you about yourself while you're doing the field work?
That's a great question. As you spend time in the field, getting to know practitioners and seeing how a particular culture transforms not only thinking, but transforms our reactions to things. I really felt some of that affecting me, in that I could be at a ceremony and a specific occurrence happen, whether it be perceived as a spiritual occurrence or a physical occurrence. And I started kind of understanding what the reaction was about to be. One of the things that really pierced me deeply during this was the power of the religion, in that I would talk to, for instance, a lady who is a daughter of Ogun, and a very, very sweet lady, but very strong. And she and her family would tell me stories of growing up in some really harsh conditions, of having some harsh experiences through life, and how the Orishas comforted her and gave her this sense of peace and power. And as you would watch rituals, it's so easy as an outsider that's never encountered any of this to automatically, presume, oh, this is, they do all these rituals to curse people, and they do all these rituals to get money and do selfish things. But in reality, I saw so much of the community here and in Cuba doing rituals out of compassion for others, out of compassion for family members. And I was personally amazed by the physical and mental strain that the practicing of the religion can put on devotees. I would watch ceremonies where, for example, during one particular ceremony, one of the orishas spoke through a priestess and identified a young lady in the ceremony as having problems with her heart. And the young lady was really surprised to hear this, because she had recently found out from her physician that there were some problems with her heart. And just to see sort of that spiritual connection, to see the physical undertaking it takes for practitioners to perform these ceremonies. I mean, it's so elaborate. It's everything from procuring animals, procuring clergy, finding a space to hold these ceremonies, having the particular foods, the particular artifacts, having someone who knows particular prayers and songs. I mean, it is a very elaborate experience to do the ceremonies in the religion. And while as outsiders, we sometimes merely just see the evidence of ceremonies or what's left after a ceremony, it doesn't really give us that full picture, or that thick description, if you will, of that cultural event until you're actually there and you actually see what's going on in that event. And so it definitely, there were a lot of aha moments for me personally. And while I'm not a practitioner of the religion, I have a great new respect for the tradition and those who practice it.
I like that you keep saying as an outsider and not a practitioner, because some people, myself included, and probably other audience members, would probably think that would see as being a practitioner. But it's incredible that you're making it the point clear that you're an outsider. And that's very respectful, and I appreciate that so much.
Well, thank you. And I think that's important, and in the beginning, when I began working with this one particular spiritual house, I had to sit down with everyone in the house and explain to them, this is what I'm doing. Let me be clear about my intentions with this. Do you have any concerns? Is there things I shouldn't photograph? Are there things I shouldn't write about? And we basically had, one big session where we interacted on those concerns and things. And other than practices that are really sort of oath bound, if you will, practices that are restricted for specific levels of initiation, I was able to see, observe, and even in some cases participate in some of the ceremonies to kind of gain an understanding into what is going on during these ceremonies. And I invite everyone to, if you're interested, the book is Fieldwork with the Saints, an ethnographic journey into Santería in the American South. You can find it on Amazon, or you can come to my website at anthrofolk.com, anthrofolk.com. And Steven, I appreciate your time and interest in this as we try to share with everyone just some of this journey, and maybe it will help them as they encounter some of the different communities involved in these types of cultures. And hopefully very soon we'll also have a practitioner of the religion on, so we can also learn from what they have to say. And again, that's our most valuable resource into understanding the cultural community is through those who are in the communities themselves.
Okay, thank you, Tony. This has been a very incredible and informative show, and I'm looking forward to the next part.
Absolutely. Well, Steven, I appreciate you as always. And listeners, we definitely appreciate you. We have been on a hiatus, I'm sure you can tell, but we are back with boots on the ground and here to share about different cultures and different communities you may encounter and how you can best do your job while observing the things that are considered sacred and taboo of the cultures you encounter. I'm Tony Kell, and you've been listening to Crime Scenes and Cultures.
Dale. Vamos a mirarnos un poquito el video. Dale, vamos a repetir la parejita, pues, si no. Dale, voy.
Bara, alo yure so que boda, homoni ala wana mama Kenya irawo. Bara suayo, homoni ala wana mama Kenya irawo. Oh, bara suayo, eke. Mama Kenya irawo.